Hi everyone, I'm Zero and welcome back to Zero 2, where today we're going to be taking another look at the Yu-Gi-Oh! Meta in our Yu-Gi-Oh! Meta Snapshot. This is the first new Yu-Gi-Oh! Meta Snapshot of the year, 2025 for those who are watching back. But we are excited to look at a brand new format because last time we were looking at this list, it looked very different. We had just seen the new ban list come out, and so the data on the website was not quite updated with all of the new changes and tournament warping meta impacts of the new set that was coming out. So a lot of the data was incorrectly skewed and incorrect. So now we've kind of got a nice image of what the format looks like after we've had a couple weeks to sit in it and understand exactly how it's shaken out. So looking at the top stacks, we've got Ryzeal being the number one and the clear number one, Maliss being number two and a clear number two. And then the rest of the decks all kind of fit into different slots here. So we've got Yubel still getting tops, Tenpai still getting tops. Those two decks got severely hit on the most recent ban list, but even so, they are still, doing fine. They were definitely had consistency hits, but can still kind of persevere through non-engine. Voiceless Voice has seen a resurgence. It's a deck we haven't talked about in a while, if at all. I don't remember if we've ever talked about Voiceless Voice, so we'll make sure to give that some special attention because I feel like it's always been creeping around this area. But with the decrease in popularity to the top decks, we see this deck shoot up a little bit. And then Labrynth has made its way back into the top seven, a deck we have talked about before. But interesting to see that it has come back up. I feel like Labrynth's a deck that does well in formats that we're still trying to figure everything out in, because it's kind of a nice, safe, easy option to play. It's flexible. You can play a lot of different trap cards in it to respond to different things. Trap cards can be very powerful in certain matchups as well. So Labrynth is a deck that I always expect to fall off a little bit. It's never the top contender, but it's always a nice safe option that will get tops inevitably. And then there are also a bunch of cool other decks that we won't get to talk about in our top 7 review here, but stuff like Goblin Biker seeing resurgence because of Ryzeal. We see stuff like Fire King falling off because the Snake Eye stuff's no longer viable. Fiendsmith, however, has not fallen off. It's just found new cards to call home, and we'll talk about that. But yeah, a lot of the Titans, there probably won't be any Azmina cards to be talked about at all up here. White Woods was a deck we had seen, White Forest, that was doing well. It's kind of fallen off, and it will fall off until we get the new stuff from Supreme Darkness. So, without further ado, let's go ahead and jump into talking about the decks individually with Ryzeal. So, we talked in depth about all of the cards from Ryzeal last time, so there's not much to really talk about, but I would say that there are two main variants that we're seeing in Ryzeal, and we'll talk about them both real quick. I think looking at the individual deck list is probably better than looking at this conglomerate, but they are Ryzeal Fiendsmith and Ryzeal Peer. So Ryzeal Fiendsmith tends to play all of the main Ryzeal stuff at the same ratios that they're playing in regular Ryzeal, sometimes omitting the quick play spell, but for the most part, it's 3 ice, 3 X, 3 sword, 1 node. And then they're playing a very heavy Fiendsmith package of 3 engraver, 3 tracked, 1 lacrima, and typically 1 Lurie, but I'm not. Oh, there's Lurie. Sorry, he is in there. Um, but yeah, so this deck is super interesting in that this is a variant that people play in order to make sure that something happens when they're playing this deck. A lot of times Ryzeal can fold to a couple of well-timed hand traps. It is pretty hand trap resilient and can always do something. It tends to put bodies on the board. So before your Xyz locked, you can always go into the Fiendsmith combo, or before you commit to the Xyz lock Ryzeal effects, you can start with your Fiendsmith combo and try and at least set up a Desiree or a wave hiking Caesar. So this is a super viable way to play the deck. But yeah, so taking a look at this list, everything seems pretty standard. Again, this is still Triff's list from Anaheim that we're looking at here, so a slightly older list, but still emblematic of what the Fiendsmith Ryzeal decks are still trying to do. They're on the Fiendsmith in Paradise, which is a card that wasn't seeing as much play in older Fiendsmith lists, but this has jumped up quite a bit as a form of additional interruption. You can send to the graveyard off of Lacrima from deck, and then while it's in the graveyard, you can send a Fiendsmith monster from your deck or extra deck to the graveyard, which you're almost always sending Desiree, who can then shuffle back another Light Fiend to send a card on the field of the graveyard, which is absolutely nuts. But otherwise, the deck's just on a ton of hand traps too. Even with these 2 engines, they're still so hyper compact that you have so much space for non-engine. A pretty crazy combination. But But yeah, so that's one option with Triff's list. Definitely one way you can play the deck. The other way people are playing it is more pure. So I guess we'll take a look at a more recent list. So January 5th is more recent. But this is a list that did well at a regional that was just pure Ryzeal. And as you can see, they're on the plugin, which is the quick play revival spell. But otherwise, it's just way more hand traps. Again, the Ryzeal engine is exactly the same: 3x, 3 ace, 3 sword, 1 node. But they just max out on hand traps, cross out, basically saying, I'm going to do my Ryzeal game plan, and I will just completely hand trap you out of the game on top of a full detonator with a bunch of pops. Crazy stuff. They weren't even maining any of the Fua or the Mulch armies. They were just in the side as crossout targets. I guess you can always put them in and play them normally, but this is pretty streamlined. This was a pretty tight list. Normally, this whole page is going to fill up with at least a third row of cards to look at, but this is just tight 3 of 3 of 3 of 3 of 3 of, like an extremely compact list. And they're also able to play Featherstorm because Castel is a Windwing Beast, rank 4, which not a lot of people think about. But this is a tech that some people had been experimenting with in the past, but now that we have a really good rank 4 strategy, and given how good Harvey's Featherstorm can be in terms of a blowout going first, this is an absolutely nuts tech. But that's Ryzeal. Let's go ahead and move on to Maliss. I feel like Maliss is kind of in the same spot as well, where there's like 2 main variants I've been seeing floating around, at least that people have been talking about. And those are Maliss Pure and Maliss with a Sky Striker engine in it. So go ahead and take a look at those real quick. This is Maliss Pure. Quote unquote, it tends to play a heavy Bestial package because of how good the Bestial cards are at banishing your Maliss monsters and triggering their summon backs for the free bodies. They also synergize really nicely in terms of just being like extra link fodder and whatnot. So super nice to see. The decks, a lot of side decks are playing Lancia just for this deck because of how often you can banish stuff. With things like Goldstark, things like Dotscaper want to be banished, all the Maliss monsters want to be banished, so that can be a really sticky point of interaction against the Maliss deck, but otherwise, it's mostly just Cyber's good stuff. In the extra deck, a bunch of great Cyber's Link monsters or generic Link options that you can use to out your opponent's board. I'm not even sure why this list is on the Moon of the Closed Heaven. I guess it's just a generic Link 2, but I'm not seeing in here Underworld Goddess or any sort of Fiendsmith stuff. So I wonder if they make this to bait the opponent into thinking they're going for Fiendsmith. That could be an option. Otherwise, I'm not seeing exactly what's going on here. But we can also go ahead and take a look at the Sky Striker variants of the deck. And we can see that it's on a very compact Striker engine of the Engage, the Hornet drones for extra link bodies, and then the Widow Anchor too, because Widow Anchor is a really effective way to deal with Detonator. It is a non-targeting steal if you have enough spells engraved, which a lot of times you do. And it, at the worst case, just gets to negate it. So, super nice. But the extra deck's pretty much the same. Cyber's good stuff. They just play the 1 Kagari for the extra link bodies. And otherwise, the rest of the deck is hand traps and other pieces of interaction, or going second breakers in this case with Striker. But yeah, so this is what Maliss is looking like right now. Not too much to say about the deck, to be honest. I spent a little bit more time on Ryzeal than I did on this. There are other variants that are trying to jam in Fiendsmith. Some are trying the Castura engine, but the main majority are either playing just the Cyber's good stuff with hand traps, or they're playing the Sky Striker stuff with some going second options as well. A super powerful meta contender, definitely something you need to be aware of, but overall, the game plan is fairly simple with Maliss. Just link up in their link 3s and accrue advantage over the course of multiple turns by banishing and summoning your guys. Fiendsmith, a deck that we haven't ever talked about by itself before, but certainly something we're not a stranger to. Most of the time, this is Kashtira Fiendsmith, or Fiendschmidt, as Joshua Schmidt has coined it. The idea in this kind of deck is that the Fiendsmith cards are really strong on their own. They can put up, obviously, an Omni Negate with Desiree, or they can put up the Wave High King Caesar off of very little resources and commitment. And additionally, the Kashtira cards provide extra link bodies. They interact well with the opponent. Unicorning your opponent, ripping an important one up from the extra deck is really strong, like ripping the sequence or the one of Necroquip or something like that is pretty crazy. So this deck and just a ton of hand traps basically ensures that at the very least you're getting to your Fiendsmith line. At the most, you're going to get a chance to get into your Kashtira stuff. But overall, your game plan is to just beat your opponent through sheer advantage due to the fact that your combo requires such little investment. A fun, interesting strategy that's kind of emerged out of a format that where you need to play really low to the ground in the face of stuff like Fuelos, in the face of stuff like Perulia, which I will note are seeing less and less play in the main deck, as you might have noticed. In a lot of these lists, they weren't even listed as a main deck option, or they're played as a one of, or they're seen in the side. Perulia is actually, and we'll talk about this more when we talk about side deck and main deck decks, but Perulia has seen more play than Fuelos, to much people's surprise, given the fact that Fuelos draws in a lot of what people would consider better scenarios. But I think people are so scared of Fuelos and they're playing decks that play well around it that Perulia actually does a lot more damage to the top decks, whether it be Maliss summoning multiple times from hand per turn with their Bystials and their normal with their monsters, or Ryzeal, which summons many, many times from the hand. Perulia can get in a ton of draws against both of those decks, which makes it an important contender to keep an eye out for. But we've looked at Fiendsmith plenty before. Is a tech engine. It really doesn't change too much as its own quote-unquote standalone deck. It's really Fiendsmith Kashtira. But let's go ahead and take a look at Yubel next. Yubel was impacted by the banlist. It got Phantom of Yubel set to 1, so 2 and 60% of decks just means that we haven't quite caught up to where we want to be. But let's see if we can find lists that are from post-banlist era, and I believe this would be from a regional that was post Phantom of Yubel limit, so this is a better indicator of what we're actually looking at here. But you can see when I was looking through that list, there weren't quite as many listed Yubel tops, so this deck is certainly seeing a decrease in play. But they're on the Fiendsmith package, what looks like to be a lighter one with just a 1 Engraver, 1 Lacrima, which is something, actually, sorry, and the 1 Tract and Lurie as well, but this is something that a lot of decks can play, because you really only need the 1 Engraver, 1 Lacrima to do any of the sort of Fiendsmith stuff, whether that's the Necroquip Princess into like Area Leader, or Sequence into Area Leader, or some Necro Princess into your Wave Hiking Caesar shenanigans. There's so much random stuff you can be jamming into the extra deck that plays well into just Fiendsmith Engraver and Lacrima, so you don't need that much main deck investment. And then the Yubel's core is still pretty compact and tight. You still got the Lotus. They're still on the 2 Spirit, 2 Regular. They get back their Spirit Gates, so you could have played 3 here. This guy opted to play 2 alongside 3 Beckoning and 1 Chaos Summoning Beast. But definitely could play 3 of this to bump your starters back up. The problem is you can no longer go through multiple Phantom of Yubel in a turn, meaning it's harder to include, or not Verudris, it's harder to include this as part of your end board when a lot of times you were using it to link off in some of your early combos, because previously you could just make multiple Phantom of Yubels in a turn and not have to worry about it. But now you can't just link it off and then hope to get it back into rotation. You still can recycle it, but it is a lot trickier to recycle. Therefore, something that a lot of players are not opting to do, instead of just they just end on this and can't use it to link quite up as hard anymore. But yeah, that's Yubel. We talked about it before, and we got a chance now to talk about the banlist implications. So we won't talk about it too much further, because honestly, I expect it to slip quite a bit. I think we're going to see the same thing with Tenpai when we take a look at this results. They do have a 3rd, 4th place from a regional. And this is with the post-ban list, 1 Kaiman, 1 Chandra. So you'll notice a lot of 1s in this list because they got the 1 Sangan, the 1 Chandra, the 1 Kaiman. But in actuality, the competency of the deck hasn't changed all that much. The Tenpai cards are still fantastic at OTKing. It just makes them a lot more vulnerable to hand traps when they don't see the Sangan summoning. Or if you do have a response for the Kaiman or the Pydra, it makes it a lot more tricky for the opponent to deal with. But yeah, they're just playing a ton of great going second cards. Oldie Slayers are in here to deal with the detonators that are floating around that are hard to get rid of. We've got a Fiendsmith package in here. It looks like as a fallback for going first, previously they were playing cards like the Kashtira engine in order to make up for going first board, but it looks like now we're playing the Fiendsmith stuff because again it's so good into so many of like the hand traps and board breakers and whatnot, setting up these Omni Negates with Desiree, setting up the Wave King High Caesar with Necroquip, and it gives you the perks of having all of the card types in your extra deck for your Ultimate Slayer. You really don't need much to OTK. The Biden into Trident into or Transcendent is plenty to OTK most of the time. So a lot of the extra deck tools that they used to be playing were pretty extraneous or niche. Especially when you have the Fiendsmith cards in here to out problematic monsters ahead of the battle phase. It becomes really, really interesting. Yeah, this deck list makes a lot of sense to me. I think this looks pretty strong, and I'm excited to see what Tenpai can be doing after it's received so many hits. All right, our next deck we're going to take a look at is Voiceless Voice. I don't think this is a deck we've gotten a chance to take a look at before, but Voiceless Voice is a ritual-based archetype that controls the opponent and locks them down with Skull Guardian primarily, who is a Omni Negate while you control Low, who's your main combo enabler. It searches and places Voiceless Voice continuous spells and traps from your deck, acts as the whole ritual material a la Shuret. Is just a pretty nuts card in general. And then all of their continuous spells are either like Searchers or Targeting Protection or Destruction Protection. They're all extremely, extremely strong stuff. They also have monsters that can both search and cheat out the requirements to ritual summon. They can play a Trias Hierarchica to put a bunch of bodies on board. There's because they can put a whole bunch of bodies on board. Sorry, and then yeah, there's just a whole bunch of stuff that can do. It's very strong. It fell out of play just because it couldn't quite contend with the power level of something like a Snake Eye, something like a Fiendsmith, and I would argue it still can't. But it is one of the like tier 2.5 options that you can be playing right now. It hasn't gotten any new support, and as you can see from the options down here in the deck list, Fiendsmith is a pretty popular way to play the deck as well. So no surprises there. Fiendsmith is going to be pretty much ubiquitous among a lot of the top decks. The engine's just so compact, so easy to access for every deck that it's kind of hard to justify not playing it. You can only really justify it if you were completely locked out of it. And even in a deck like Ryzeal that does completely lock you out of it once you do stuff, they're playing the Fiendsmith cards. So they're just absolutely stupid. I feel like they're the next thing that has to go in terms of like a ban list when we get that in a couple months. But yeah, that'll be remain to be seen, and it's besides the point. But yeah, they're on 3 low, 3 Diviner is another starter because you can always dump Herald of the Arclight from your extra deck to the graveyard to search a new ritual, monsters, or spells. I believe their ritual spell is... I don't remember what the ritual spell is. I don't see it. This is continuous. This is continuous. This is continuous. Do one of these treated themselves as a ritual spell? Oh no, this is not continuous. This is it. Prayer is the Voiceless Voice. Yeah, this card's nuts. You tribute monsters, and then if a light ritual you control leaves the field, banish it, and special summon a Cerebus from your deck, ignoring summoning conditions. So it gives you an extra follow-up or insulation against your opponent's interactions. Their extra deck is a bunch of just generic good stuff. They almost never access it. Their main board ends on like a low Skull Guardian with a bunch of their spells and the continuous trap setup. The continuous trap is a bounce, which is pretty stupid. Or so maybe no, sorry, it's not a bounce. It's a destroy. I thought it was a bounce. It's a destroy. Is the Cerebus monster a bounce? He bounces himself and then summons a ritual from your deck, which is Cerebus, which is a summon negate. So there's a whole lot of layered interaction in this deck that makes the deck pretty interesting to play around and play with, but overall, I do think it is a tier down from these other top decks that we've already talked about. And then last but not least is Labrynth. We've taken a look at Labrynth plenty of times in the past, but they're on just the suite of good trap cards. Impulse is one of their newer toys that they can play around with, but for the most part, the deck remains unchanged. It just plays really well in the top decks, given how many powerful traps they can slot in here. Things like simultaneous equation cannons can absolutely go crazy. Stuff like Daruma Karma Cannon is extremely strong. And then, of course, you get all the advantage you generate off of stuff like Lady Labrynth, Lovely Lady, welcome and big welcome. Just absolutely nuts stuff. I'm stunned that welcome is at 2 in the majority of deck lists. I feel like it would be at 3. That's kind of stunning to me, but it is what it is. And yeah, they really weren't hurt by the ban list at all. So they're kind of just creeping back up as the general power level of the format quote unquote reduces as a whole. Again, Ryzeal and Maliss were already the best decks and went untouched because they were just released. So these two decks I would expect to just be the most common decks you'll see. I mean, you can see they're taking up 60% of top cut already, and there's still a bunch of old tournaments that are contributing to these results. So once they fully saturate the format, I would say this is going to be like 75% of the meta is going to be these two. So definitely what you can expect to be seeing. But there's a lot of other options you can be playing at the rogue list, the rogue tier. So definitely don't feel like you're cornered into playing one of these two decks. But know that your odds of success are best if you're looking to play the most competitive way by playing one of these two options. But yeah, so that's everything I wanted to talk about in general for the meta. Let's go ahead and move on to the main deck techs. We've got cards like Infinite Impermanence, seeing almost ubiquitous play in every deck. Ash Blossom, second best choice. This ordering has not really changed since we've looked at it, essentially. The percentage has just gone up in terms of like more decks are playing hand traps again. There was a brief period of time where board breakers were starting to become the more dominant force, but I think hand traps have something a massive resurgence. Ash Blossom especially because of how well it plays into the Charmies. Now what's interesting here is the statistics are showing that Fualos is seeing more play than Perulia, but I feel like anecdotally I've seen a lot more play from Perulia, but maybe that's due to price point in my local area and the regionals I've been looking at have kind of people have been priced out of Fuelos a little bit. People might also be holding out to buy it until the new reprint comes out. So there could be a number of factors here, and maybe if we look at the side deck, we'll see Perulia with more success. But in any case, Nibiru very strong into Maliss. It's not so great into Ryzeal. It's fine, but they always have the Fiendsmith option, or at least they usually have the Fiendsmith option to set up the Wave Hiking Caesar before the Nibiru comes out. So a lot of times this just doesn't work. Although it is seeing main deck play in 71% of decks, so a strong option in the TCG for sure. Master Duel less so because of how good Tenpai is, but that's a whole separate question. Talents is still a very strong card. Not much to talk about why it's good. We know it's good. Great strong card going first or second. And then just the suite of hand traps that people are playing. Veiler, Ogre, Call By, stuff like that. Fiendsmith and Paradise seeing play in 42% of decks is nuts. That just shows you how pervasive the Fiendsmith engine is. I guess they don't consider a card like Lacrima or a card like Engraver to be an tech that's just a deck itself. So the pervasiveness of Fiendsmith and Paradise is 42% of decks are using this as a tech, and not every deck that's playing Fiendsmith is playing Paradise is absolutely bonkers to me. That just shows how dominant Fiendsmith is right now, and how dominant we can expect it to be moving forward. So if you haven't picked up Fiendsmith cards, I'd at the very least recommend you pick up one Engraver and one Lacrima, just so that you have access to the deck and the rest of the extra deck stuff. But those two cards are all you need in the main deck to play the engine. Paradise is super cheap as well. You can pick that up and play that too. But if you want the fuller engine, I understand as well. It's just a bit pricier. And then Call By, Magnamut makes a lot of sense. Surprised that Magnamut and the other Bestials aren't higher or on here, given how pervasive Maliss is. Maliss is like one of the best decks, and they're all main decking like 3 copies a piece of every Bestial you could be playing under the sun. So Magnamut seeing only 38% of play is surprising, and maybe that will go up as more Maliss tops make their way onto the sheet. Onto the side deck, we've got Lancia as the #1 side deck card. Super exciting stuff. This card is a blowout against Maliss. They pretty much just pass turn if you resolve Lancia on them because their Bestials can't do anything. Their Maliss, like Field Spell, can't do anything. They can't revive any of their guys because they can't even banish them in the first place to get the advantage that they want back. Basically, just shuts down the entire turn. I would be side decking this at 3 in every side deck that I'm playing at the moment, so keep that in mind. Dim Barrier, another fantastic card, but this is for Ryzeal. Almost entirely shuts down the Ryzeal deck. Now, the advantage of playing the Fiendsmith engine in Ryzeal means that you're not committed to playing only Xyz, and you can instead still make some combos happen under Dim Barrier by doing your full Link Fusion combos with Fiendsmith, but at the very least, you're keeping them off the very powerful tool that is Detonator. the deck can struggle to accrue a lot of advantage without being able to make duo drive. So Dimensional Burial still puts in a ton of work. It's not so great in a Maliss though. So you kind of have this duality where like this card is fantastic in the one top deck, this card is fantastic in another top deck. You want to find space for both, but it can be tricky to find space for both. So a lot of decks are playing like a Thrust package I've seen with Thrust and Artifact Sanctum as a way to like guarantee a way to see Dim Barrier if you can search it off Thrust, or Sanctum, you can search Lancia and do that against the Maliss decks. So Thrust seeing a lot of play makes a ton of sense to me. It also searches generic back row hate or ulti slayer if you need to get that stuff off the board. So makes a lot of sense to me. And then yeah, as I was mentioning, Perulia seeing a lot of side deck success. Fulos seeing a lot less so. Now, granted, Fulos is seeing like more total success in the main deck, but I do expect Perulia to continue to rise. I think I've said that every week, and I've been wrong every week, but I will continue to stand by my Perulia support. I do think this card is really strong. I think it's very good in the current format. And I think even at 40%, it's being underutilized in a lot of side decks, given how good it is meta. But yeah, cross out in here, as a lot of decks are on main deck hand traps, so much so that they can afford to play cross out to play through stuff going first. Call by the Grave, also on a resurgence because of how many hand traps are around, because of how good the graveyard stuff is. Being able to stop a Desiree that's sent off of Paradise can be absolutely imperative for dealing with the Fiendsmith end board. So a lot of great stuff you can be doing with call by and cross out that make a lot of sense. But yeah, those are the side deck techs, the main deck techs, and the decks that we're looking at in this current format. If there are other decks you'd like me to take a look at that I missed, definitely let me know down in the comments below. I read every comment. And if you have any ideas for ways I can improve or ways you'd like me to change how this series works, definitely let me know down there. If you like this kind of content and want to see more, definitely let me know by liking the video. Go ahead and subscribe to my channel. We're on our way to 100 subs. That's my next major milestone goal that I want to hit. So clicking that button is very low effort, and if you ever change your mind or you want to stop subscribing to my content, you're free to do so, but it really helps out the channel a ton and lets me know that I'm moving in the right direction. And like I said, of course, if I'm moving in the wrong direction and you think I need to make changes to my content, definitely let me know in the comments below as well. But without further ado, thanks so much for watching. I appreciate everyone, and I will see you in the next video. Bye!